Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of MECCA Moments here on Friday, August 28th, 2020. I am here with Michell Stanley. She's a coach and certified licensed social worker, certified coach, and licensed clinical social worker. Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me. And I'm so excited to be here on this MECCA moment today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. And, we had a pre-conversation, and this is definitely something that we all need to have, in our arsenal toolbox to deal with people, especially in this time where, we have racial tension, we have coronavirus, we have just so many things going on. And I think it's so important that we learn how to communicate to each other. And really, what you're going to introduce to us today is learn how to coach. Can you explain what coaching really is and how it can be applied to our everyday lives?
Sure. So I really like how you said, that coaching is something that can be added to our toolbox. And that's for everyone, regardless of, how old you are, assuming you have the gift of language, you can speak, and that you can have conversations with others, regardless of your education level. It's a skill that everybody, I believe, should learn. So I'm going to define what coaching is. So the coaching definition, according to the ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, is that it's a creative and collaborative relationship that is geared to help you maximize your personal and professional potential. Mm-hmm. And the idea about that, when I say it's a creative and collaborative partnership, is that it's beneficial to both the person receiving the coaching as well as the person who is coaching. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship and partnership.
And so it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So you're saying when you're getting coaching, it's not only helping the coach, but also the person getting coaching, correct?
Correct. It helps the coach as well as the client being coached, because one of the differences between like coaching and therapy is the amount of self-disclosure that you can have that is deemed beneficial. So sometimes you sharing something that relates to your client's life about your own life, whatever they share is going to actually relate to you. And so you kind of keep building off of each other. And that's what I say creates that synergy. Whereas what somebody is putting into a relationship is getting exponentially multiplied or enhanced.
Right.
Conversation.
And we talked about earlier before we got on air, how can coaching impact, some of this tension that we're having right now in our country, and even tension that we're having in our homes as we were holed up with family members that we probably haven't spent so much time over the last few months. How can coaching impact those relationships in a mutually beneficial way?
Yeah. So I'll start with there's two ways. So personal relationships as well as professional relationships and professional spheres. So I'll speak about the personal relationships like friends and family members. I'll start with that. So like, as we know right now with what's been happening with, the racial tension, the police brutality, as if we've been trying to get more mental health services out to marginalized populations.
Right.
And so, but as we also know that those professional services require money that sometimes is lacking. And there's also right now with such a need for mental health counseling and therapy, right. It's hard to get access to that. And so when people can start coaching a conversation, they can actually start getting and giving the benefit of that mental emotional support through conversations. And you can start doing that with your friends and family, and you don't necessarily have to rely just on a therapist. And sometimes you could get a benefit from coaching. I mean, this is for like, not if you have like a severe mental illness or, anything like that, like you might need to see a therapist then. But it will allow you to get that mental and emotional support without necessarily needing to go to a therapist.
So what does coaching really look like when we're talking to, let's just say a friend? What does coaching look and sound like when you're practicing coaching?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think that you gave an example and we talked about this before, but I said that one thing is that like, in our friendships, like people are talking, but we don't, and they're sharing information with each other. But often when a friend comes to us, we don't know what they actually are talking to us, why they're sharing what they're sharing. And so one of the things that could help is to get clear or offer that clarity in a conversation. Like, are you sharing this with me because you want to be heard or validated? Are you sharing this with me because you want help, or are you looking for advice about something? Or are you, simply just kind of, you're not sure what the reason is? And so those are some of the ways that often we have no idea, but if we get clarity on that, we could also evolve and like get something out of a conversation. Whereas most people times in a conversation, we don't know what we need. We don't usually get it. And we don't know how to give it. And so once we know what is the purpose of the conversation, there's 3 different ways in which you could show up to allow that person to get that result. And again, like I said, once you give that result to someone, you also can start to get a little bit from it yourself, because what you create in a coaching conversation is that synergy again, but it creates a container where someone's deepest like desires, inspirations can come forth.
I think not knowing that information sounds very frustrating, and having a conversation where you don't know the intention, you don't know what's actually being looked for, it could create some tension, I would imagine.
Sure. And so one of the things that's, I think, key about a coaching situation, and I, I'm a therapist as well as a life coach, I noticed that like one of the main differences I notice in coaching is that it makes people have to think in the moment. And a lot of the very first question that you ask someone in a coaching session is, what is something you'd like to do some thinking about? Or what would you like to focus on today? And for a therapy client, like you might be, or therapist, you're accustomed to not projecting anything onto the client. So they just talk about whatever. But often then the time will go by, 50 minutes or 45 minutes will go by, and you talked about what was just like top of your mind, but that doesn't mean that you actually got the result that you could have gotten. And often people aren't aware that they can even get a result. They're often unaware. Like I always say to people, if you look at your life and you look at like the goals that you want to achieve,
right?
There's some things that you can take action on that you know you need to do. There's some things that you need to get help with or problem solve that you don't know how to figure out yet. And then there's a third category that's just emotions that just are left over. Often people are trying to do something about every category in their life, which you cannot. And they're often trying to do something about the emotions that they're having. And so when you can start acknowledging that there's that middle category, there's a whole category of your life that you probably just don't know what to do with, and you need to get help. And start having a conversation about that. You'd be surprised what would start coming up for you. But we're not usually even being vulnerable enough to say, hey, I don't know the answer to this.
I think that's, I often talk about the power of questioning, and that is exactly what that is. When you have these conversations with yourself or with a coach, it's really, taking the moment, the time to explore, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts. And I would say, many people don't take that opportunity or don't even know they have that opportunity. And I like how you point out that it's kind of important. And the differences maybe between coaching and therapy may be solution focused in coaching versus maybe exploration of the past or exploration of things that maybe you don't understand. But I like the solution. That's kind of where I prefer coaching over therapy, because solution focused right here, right now, in the present, in what direction we can go into.
Right. And one of the reasons I think that the solution is important and is just simply because of right now. We are in the process of change and of wanting change. And so change requires that people have to not just think different, because that's the first part of the change process, is your attitude shifting and you're thinking differently. But complete change requires behavior. And if a therapy conversation stops at the exploration and the understanding, but does not ask somebody to say, what will you do differently now or next? The coaching theory would say that the change is incomplete.
Mm. So you're saying it's just not enough to think differently, but the behavior actually has to align with that thinking.
Right. And if you look at like the conversations that are happening right now around racial inequity, that is one of the biggest frustrations that we're hearing, is that people have been saying for years, I think differently and I support,
Right.
But like that is not, and we know that that's not enough.
Right. So since you brought it up, let's talk about that. And I think that's very important. There have been conversations about race and justice, and we're seeing now even more than ever, people are having a change in how we're thinking about race and justice in America. Black Lives Matter, the protest, but it's not enough to just have a change in your thoughts, but really the behavior and solutions centered around that. How can we create more solutions and not just think differently?
Yeah. So two things that coaching says about how people can have it's about being accountable.
Yeah.
So the final stage of every, not just coaching conversation, but the coaching container is accountability. And there's two ways in which accountability can occur. Mm-hmm. One is through action, which is, pretty clear what that is. What are you going to do now? What next step are you going to take? Understand that step could also be like thinking about something or planning something or preparing something. So that the next step could be action or it could be thinking, or it could be like, attitude, or it could be intention. But another way that we can have accountability is through awareness. And being accountable to maintaining an awareness. And I'll give an example. I spoke to a man the other day in a session, and he was saying, I'm having all these, it was a white man. He said, I'm having all these conversations, and, people are telling me like, you're not doing enough as a white man to really change this. And he says, and I feel like I'm not doing enough. And I said to him, yes, you are going to feel that way. And that is okay for you to feel that way. And he said to me, you know what? He said, you're right. And he said, and I realized that like me trying to find the solution right now is me trying to get out of this discomfort that I'm having. Mm-hmm. Part of this movement is saying that you're not getting out of it, and you are going to have the awareness of that burden or that inequity probably for the rest of your life. And that's okay.
So it's uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable.
Yes, because remember, change does not occur when you are comfortable.
Yeah.
For change to really happen, you have to be uncomfortable. That's the motivation for change.
So, why would we change if we feel great, right? Who would change something that feels great? Right. And so I think that's great to point out that the uncomfortable nature or experience is actually an alert to move towards change. It's sort of like pain. Pain is kind of alert to say what you're doing right now is not good for the body. And there needs to be some type of change for this to stop.
Right. And the thing is, I liked what he said, because he's saying it may never stop. And that's how I know that your work is going to continue. And it doesn't stop. It shouldn't stop after you do like this one, you went down and you marched today and now I feel better. I'm like, so really, you shouldn't feel that way. And that's okay. And so we can say in coaching, the other thing they say is that the uncomfortable emotion, the discomfort or the fear, that's okay. And we want you to use that as your motivational fuel.
Okay, so someone's out there listening to this conversation. They're saying, okay, you're talking about coaching, you're talking about feeling uncomfortable, you're talking about aligning your thoughts with action. So where do I start to begin to be a coach or to be coached? What happens now?
Okay. So I would say that like we're a little far away from like becoming a coach. I think that what I really want people to do now is to start bringing these concepts of coaching into their conversations.
Okay, well, let's start there.
Okay, and anybody can start doing that.
What are the concepts of bringing coaching into our everyday conversations?
Okay, so number one is that we really need to change the way that we are listening.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, yeah. So all right, I think not everybody, but many people, and especially like, people that have been trained in mental health, we have probably learned in our career, in our education, how to like actively listen. And so we often think like, I got that, like I checked the box, I know how to listen. But I'm going to tell you something interesting. I did this coach training with a group of therapists like a couple years ago. And the first step is called mirroring. Whereas you're just simply reflecting back the key points of what somebody is saying, like what is most important to them. And what I found with those therapists is that they were actually reflecting back what they heard the client in exercise, in a way that was very problem focused. So if the client said, today, like, I got up and, I felt a little sluggish this morning. I noticed that like there was just a lot of thoughts on my mind and I was a little bit overwhelmed. The therapist reflected back, so you're feeling anxious. And so that already yes, they were sort of listening, but they stigmatized and they labeled them right away and they categorized what they were saying. So when we talk about mirroring, it's simply mirroring like what the person is saying while honoring their own agency and competency. It's keeping them on the same level as you. It may not be anxiety for them, and we don't need to necessarily impose that on them and make them start thinking that way. So the first step is really listening without an agenda.
Can you give me an example of a mirrored response to that, so our audience can hear what a mirrored response to what you just gave?
Yeah. So a mirrored response to it would be, so what I'm hearing you say is that this morning you woke up and you felt a little bit overwhelmed and you noticed yourself having a lot of thinking, and you felt a little bit sluggish. Is that right?
That sounds great. Now, I will say, Michelle, I've done this with friends, and especially if you do it with new friends, I've heard this back to me. Can you not understand what I'm saying? What if you get that kind of response where they feel like they're being patronized, or you're not really understanding what's happening, or they don't want to repeat themselves? What happens then? Because I've done this before, and it's kind of created either more tension in the conversation.
Right. So that's a really good point. So so the number one thing, the first foundation of coaching is also establishing a relationship of trust. So mirroring is sometimes the way to establish trust or to get on the same page with someone. So when if you've known someone, there's already trust established, they might be like, what are you? They probably already trust you enough that you understand them, that you can do less of that mirroring. So you might be able to, again, like self-disclose a little bit more. You might be able to summarize. You don't need to repeat back verbatim. But the more that someone does not trust you or does not know whether you understand them, that's when you need to mirror. And you also need to mirror more closely when you start having a disagreement, or I always say your number goes up, meaning like your internal thermometer is going up. That's when you need to like make sure you're on the same page and start mirroring. So couples, I do a lot of relationship work. If a couple is entering into like, both of their numbers are going up above, like when you have above a 7, you're in fight or flight zone. You have no business like working something out or trying to problem solve when either or both of you are in fight or flight. And so what I say to couples, that's the time you bring your number down by beginning or going back to mirroring. And it just works.
Got it. Okay, so let's go back to the strategies. We did the one, mirroring, and what was the second?
So the second part of, I think, a coaching environment is about creating a thinking environment. And so that is about helping someone to do their best thinking. And so when you're listening to someone, like the first part is like just listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Next part of listening is like hearing from them what is the most important thing that they're either focused on or they're trying to get from the conversation. And you can get that from listening. So if you had a conversation with your friend, Brandon, and you know that there's already trust, you might have been able to hear from listening to them, hey, just checking in with you. So I'm hearing you say like, you know, blah, 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 blah. Are you trying to like work something out with me right now? Do you want to, are you just looking for a sounding board? Like, what is it that you like? How is it that you like? What is it you like to get from this conversation? So you understand, you get clarity about them, about what they would like or why they're sharing that information. And if you can, so that's the second part, is understand the purpose of the conversation.
So first listening,
mm-hmm.
and mirroring, and then to understanding the purpose of the conversation.
Yes. And often we assume that we know the purpose of the conversation and we just go on it. But I think that in coaching, one of the things that they say is you have to start with a firm foundation. You get clear with that person. So it sounds like you want to mostly to be, here's what I hear a lot. People are actually, if you ask them, they don't know what they want, but if they actually have to think about it, they want validation.
Right. To be heard.
Yes.
Or to know, be seen, or like, I'm here and that's all I want you to know. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that being like, okay, once they can say like, okay, I want to be seen or I want to be heard, then you might like say to them like, oh, if like I just like reflected to you what I heard and you're asking me like, you know, what do I not understand you? But your need is to be understood. Like, what's up with that? Then the conversation is going to go to a different level, because then they're going to say like, what they're going to realize is that, yeah, I thought that I wanted to be understood, but maybe understanding was just the first point. And they're like, great, like what next?
Right. So listen to, then validate it. Okay, what's the third one?
The third is to get clear on what the purpose of the conversation is.
Yeah.
And I say that like generally when people are talking in their personal relationships, we have generally, here's what I see, the need to be heard, to be understood, the need to problem solve, the need to vent,
mm-hmm.
the need to get help. Problem solve and get help can be kind of similar. So I'll break it down like that. The need to be heard or validated, the need to get help or problem solve, and the need to vent. And often people don't know, like they're not going to know, but I'm going to say emotion. Sometimes we just have emotion and we just don't know what to do with it. And so often, because we're not therapists, that emotional need, the first thing is simply to express it
mm-hmm.
and to have it be understood or to have it be just received.
And so when you're doing this coaching and you're going through this process, what can you expect versus not using coaching in this process?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen is that like people are so like often they're first of all trying to like give some people advice or a solution. And if they started with listening, I think one of the surprises that you see, or okay, two things. Number one, if you just shut up and you sit there and you just breathe, like when you would normally interject or say something, and if you just like paused and breathed, took a breath, breathed, you would probably notice that the person would keep talking. And as they kept talking, you would see that they probably start to think and they start to work out their own stuff. So you don't need to do a lot of heavy lifting. They're figuring it out. And like, I used to work my first in grad school internship was in suicide hotline. And you're like, you're like, oh my God, like, how am I going to help people that are suicidal? And what they taught you is that if you just listen for the first like 10 minutes, the person is going to turn on their own. They're going to turn towards their solution. And then all you do is support that. So it's the same thing, is that when you listen to people, they're going to eventually pivot to like usually talking about their solution. They're going to do it themselves.
You know, a lot of people think they're actually really great listeners. Why is that? Why would you say people think they're great listeners when actually they really aren't?
Yeah. That is, I don't know. I think that one reason is because there's different levels of listening.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are aware of like a more shallow level of listening, such as interrupting or waiting.
Yeah.
Which means that like I heard some part of what you said and I understood enough that I can now talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of that layer or that pyramid, one level up, is waiting. I'm waiting for you to finish talking, so now I can say what I want to say. And usually people are doing that 2 levels of listening, and I'm saying that neither of those are actually deep listening, because you're not actually fully present for what the person is saying, because you are on some level waiting or thinking about what you want to say.
So I mean, I think that's great that coaching encourages you to have a deeper level of listening, so that you can actually understand the needs of the people you're having the conversation with. I know we talked about earlier about race and culture in America. How can we listen, in such a fragile state that we are in, to move towards solutions when it comes to, actually the March on Washington is going on today. How can we work to incorporate coaching and listening to come to solutions when it's so, the tension is so thick?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I didn't think about this until now, but I know that I've been invited into spaces to have some type of like healing racial trauma discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why people are thinking that they're going to heal racial trauma in an hour. So I just want to I want to like say that like this type of work, if we're even talking about like, I'm not going to even just talk about healing. We're talking about dealing. It requires time and it requires cohesion and trust that we do not or may not have in most spaces in which we are trying to facilitate the dealing of the issue. And I found that out the hard way. But yeah, establishing cohesion and trust is important. And one of the things that I would say is important is that we're dealing with an issue that we do not have the solutions for yet. Because what we've done so far has not I would say is inadequately addressed the issue, and that's clear. So when I'm listening to people, myself, give solutions, I don't think it's a full solution to talk about what you already did, because we need to be thinking about new solutions. Therefore, we need to be creating a space for people to think, and not just a space where we impart information that we already know. How do we start thinking together?
I think that's good. Facebook, Twitter are not places for solutions or places for adequate, space to come up with ways to collaborate and moving forward in the ways that we want to. And I think part of that, we get frustrated because we think, oh, if I give you all these facts about racism, then you'll understand that this is wrong. And it's more than just knowledge, right? It's more about thinking. It's more about collaborating. It's more about creating a space where trust can provide an opportunity for you to say things that you probably wouldn't say, in hopes that you could move into a more enlightened and constructive space, right?
Exactly. And the word that you're using now is actually very important, space. Is that in order to have thinking, you actually need to have space. If you look at the arena in which this dealing with the issue is supposed to be occurring, even like in politics, there is no room for space in a conversation. And if there's no room for space, you cannot actually, it's going to be difficult for you to actually listen. It's going to be difficult for you to think. And so you cannot, in that space that has no space, you cannot come up with a good solution.
We talked earlier before we got on here about how important coaching is for Black and Brown people in America at this time. Why is that? Why do you think it's so important?
Yeah, so actually, like the subtitle of this conversation was about how to empower people. So growth, relationships or intimacy, and purpose. And so I would say that, like, for people of color, our identity has not been tied to a sense of empowerment or a value that is empowering. And so we are then taking that disempowered identity into our relationships. And it has created a familiarity of having a role in relationship, personally and professionally, where we are serving other people or working for other people, as opposed to leading or empowering our people to self-determine our forward movement in a way that is purposeful, but that's also empowering.
So let me see if I can get this. You're saying possibly that we're operating out of identities that have been formed outside of who we actually are, and that is causing friction into determining our direction, our prosperity, our success, because we have not been able to form identities that celebrate those characteristics.
Correct. I like the way that you said it, and I'll just I'll say it again in a more clear way. Is that our identities have essentially we live in a society. America has a history of racial oppression. Mm-hmm. So I think it's accurate to say that our identities, we would have to do a lot to not have an identity that came from that socialization. So without that training, we all developed in some ways. I'm not removed from that at all. An identity that was stemming from a racial oppression. And without training, we carried that identity into our personal and our professional relationships. And if our personal and professional relationships are stemming from an identity that is founded in oppression, we cannot be purposeful towards our empowerment.
And so how do we coach ourselves and coach others out of an identity rooted in oppression?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think that, if I have to think about it, I believe that there's is where spirit comes into play. Mm-hmm. I think most people, if had to sit alone with themselves and their thoughts for a moment, would eventually understand or hear that they have an inner source of wisdom that knows better.
Yeah.
And so if we can connect to that part of ourselves that knows our inner truth, even if you're not very clear on it, and I say that we can anchor in it. Sometimes I say that word, I'm saying anchor, like a boat has an anchor. We can start to anchor in it physically, mentally, and emotionally. And that is what I say security is. We're trying to create security in a very material way. But I believe security in a spiritual context is about knowing that you have enough you are enough and that you do enough. And that would include your material wealth, but it's not the only part of it.
I think that's so important. We hear that phrase often, you are enough. And I don't think people understand. I mean, that's very clear when you go back to saying anchored in, our truth. And starting from a foundation of enough is so important in terms of how you move forward. Even if you have so much money, even if you're rich, if you don't have an inner anchor that says that you are enough, you really won't operate in a space that mirrors that identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so coaching, how do you, taking time, I guess, just taking some time.
Yeah, well, let's okay. So I think that's okay. One of the premises of coaching is about intention. So the coach supports the client and
I just saw Oprah walk in when you said intention.
Yeah, Oprah's doing her 20-minute meditation. Yes. Intention. So the coach helps and supports the client in identifying but maintaining clear intention.
Mm-hmm.
And so that intention is supported in the session, but your intention is also supported in your life. So one of the things I do with people if anybody that comes to Moksha Living, which is the practice that we cohabitate with the MECCA Group, it's free. Like you can participate in intentional living like for free. And I'm teaching and I'm encouraging people to collaborate on this idea that when you can anchor in this idea yourself of your empowered being, you start creating habits, physical, mental, and emotional habits in your life that care for yourself in a different way and in an empowered way. And when you have that foundation of habits in your individual life, you're going to create habits in your relationships. And when you start creating habits in your relationships, those habits will also support what you want in your career. But what we get when we start doing that is alignment. And so that what we are doing in our individual daily habits is supporting what we want to nurture in our relationships. And what we want to nurture in our relationships supports our purpose in our career or in our work.
So we have first anchoring ourselves in intention, and then creating habits that support that intention. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to break it down in simple terms. I think this is good for coaching. It's intention, communication, and action.
Mm-hmm. Intention, communication, and action. Mm-hmm. And so working with those things on a daily basis, I think a lot of that's why it's so important for affirmations, because we forget, and it's important to recommit every day, every moment to these intentions and these actions, or you'll end up back where you started. Correct?
Correct.
And so doing this, that's where the changes start, right? It starts in your thinking first, but it aligns with habits that turn into behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And anyone can do this.
Anyone can do this, and I encourage people to start doing it now, today.
So today, what's one thing that they can do right now? Right now, in this moment, they're watching right now, and they're like, "I want to start right now because I'm hearing this conversation. I'm so powered up, and I'm motivated." What happens right now?
Yeah. So often when people are thinking about goals, they're thinking about what they want to achieve and what their life would look like, what they will do. But one of the questions that I think anybody can ask themselves right now is that if you got all the things that you wanted to get in your life, like how would you feel, or how would you be in your life and in your relationships? How would you feel and how would you be? And that is usually one word. It could be at peace. It could be fulfilled. It could be, so the point is, it could be happy. The point is that like everybody supposedly wants to be happy.
Yeah.
But they're not clear on what is the actual emotional experience flavor of their happiness.
Mm.
So to start, and it's usually not 20 things because the mind can't focus on 20 things at once. The mind is most powerful when it can focus on just a few things at one time.
Yeah.
If you identified one thing that is most important for you to be experiencing in your life to help you go forward, and make that your intention. And I say it's a word that you can write, that you should be able to and it should resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
My word for the year has been patience. And it has been so hard.
Yeah.
But through like prayer and just continual habits, it has started to deliver for me 6 months later in a way that has been a bigger result than I have ever like felt with any other intention in my life.
Yeah.
So write the word down, I would say, once you identify it. And then I always say to people that word can be anchored in the body. So actually sit with the word and just put all of your focus. So intention is about focus. So just for like 5 breaths, put your focus on that word. And then actually see if that word can become a felt sensation in your body. Or if there's a place in your body that knows that experience. And so when I think of the word patience, I can get like a sense of like calm and groundedness and steadiness that I can actually feel in my body. And you can see my voice just dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you can anchor that in your body, then you start aligning with that feeling and centering from that. And all the decisions and your communication and your action can start coming from that, not just mental intention, but that felt intention.
I like how, it's really about focus. That one word is really about focus. What do you actually desire? And making a physical representation so that it becomes physical, not only memory, but physical memory. And so that you can experience your intention at any moment you choose to recall it. And I think that's powerful to do that. And I would be coming up with my word and feeling it all day, every day after this show. But I think that's something that, the memory, a lot of times we get sidetracked because we don't even remember what we actually want or desire, because our lives are so impacted in so many ways, and not remembering that focus, that desire can change your trajectory in a great way. And thank you for the exercise a little bit. That was great. And so using coaching to come up with desired outcomes, how can you kind of impact conversations that you're not really invited to? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like race, there's some conversations that you're not, because of the space we're in, you don't feel like you can insert yourself. How can you use coaching to come into the room and come into that space?
Mm-hmm. Can you give a little bit more of a specific example?
When we're talking about race, a lot of people say, they don't want to, if you're a white, you don't want to talk about a certain topic because it creates tension. It creates, undesired outcomes usually. How can you insert yourself into conversations that you want to have that you don't always feel comfortable in having?
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, I want to acknowledge, and not to glorify the white experience in any ways, but like I am talking to a lot of white people that are struggling with how to help, how to be an ally, but also not to like impose or infringe or step on anybody's toes or, convey racism. So I want to acknowledge that it's a challenging situation that I have not spent a lot of time figuring out, because that's not my job or role. However, I've actually been excusing. I've given myself permission to not have to figure that out for them, but I am giving them the space to think about it. And so what I would say is that if there is a firm white person in particular, is that you have to understand that there's a reason that you're not like accepted and welcome into spaces, and to begin there with the intention that you would like to participate and you would like to offer, and you could perhaps express that intention and maybe ask about what would need to happen or what would need to be created in order for trust to be established for that to happen. And they may, knowing that there just may not be that opportunity anytime soon. And then therefore, if there's not the opportunity, I would say that really what white people need to do, and I'm not the first person to say that, is that you need to, before you go in any spaces to share, you need to go into the space and listen.
Right.
Make yourself available for that. And make yourself available for some mirroring of what you're listening and what you're understanding. And then once you do that and that trust and cohesion is built, then I would say you get permission and consent. I have some ideas that I would like to share. Mm-hmm. If we could create a forum for that, or if we could have a follow-up conversation.
I like that, and I thought it was important to point out, because a lot of times there are people in this world, and who have solutions, but have not taken the time to actually listen to the needs of the people that the solutions are for. And so I think it's important that listening, going back to our earlier conversation, listening is the start of really transformation into solutions. Our time is almost up. Is there anything that you want to say about coaching and why it's necessary for not just professionals, but for everyday people to invite coaching into our conversations to elicit intimacy and purpose?
Sure. So I think the last thing that I would say is that, like, the book that we use for our school is called Time to Think, and it's by Nancy Klein. And the premise of her book is about giving people and situations and organizations creating thinking environments in all of these spaces. And I'm saying that applies to outside of the personal relationship, because in a lot of these social, human relationships, social justice areas, or areas that are affecting especially minority communities, I'll say like the education system, the political system, the healthcare system, the justice system, all of these systems, those relationships within those client and professional as well as colleague relationships, they are not centered around the foundation of listening. And so therefore, they are also not creating spaces where people can collaboratively and in an empowered way think together. And so when we can start to coach conversations and teach people how to coach and start coaching conversations in these spaces, we can literally change the world, because we can start thinking and being collaborative and empower people in the spaces where we most need it.
It's all about collaboration and listening. And you can't collaborate if you have not heard any message. And you cannot create trust if you're not willing to hear and see someone. And you can't do that if you aren't willing to start from where they are right now in this moment and meet them where their needs are in this exact moment. And so I think coaching from this conversation is definitely a tool that we all need to incorporate into our lives at every moment, at every step, to find harmony and move towards collaboration in terms of solution and problem solving, how can people? I know you said you had a giveaway at before.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I have a giveaway below, or that you'll share. Oh, wait, there it is. And this is just a basic toolkit to how you can start coaching your conversations. So it's a coaching conversation toolkit, and it will outline some steps that you can start using right now, as you're talking to your friends, family, and clients. And I think, Brandon, I like that you said this. It is really about collaboration, and collaboration is about, like, we're on the same level. It's not a position of hierarchy; it's equality. And we have not, in all the spheres I've listed out there, we're not having conversations on an equal level.
I think that's, you can see it on the news, you can see it on, online, and it comes from a place of ego. Like everyone wants to feel we're all special. And this is not the all lives matter thing, but we all want to assert, a certain level of position in the world, and we all have to start out at the same place so that we can move to a direction that we all can fit in. But definitely, definitely, we need to kind of work together, because it's just impossible to do things on kind of one agenda, right?
Yeah. And like you said, when it's all driven by ego, the root of ego is also fear.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so it is all being driven by fear. And we cannot be living in abundance when we are oriented or rooted around fear.
I love the word abundance, because right now I think the opposite of abundance is scarcity. And we're operating a lot with fear and scarcity impacts every avenue of our lives and the people around us. And getting rid and understanding that fear can really change our lives. And coaching can really help that. Even if you have a space, creating the space to understand that fear can even just move the needle just a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stanley, for talking with me today, talking with MECCA about coaching, about, listening. How do you know, before we go, how do you know when someone's not listening to you? And what should you do? Because sometimes, I don't think we talk about constructive conflict or confrontation. Sometimes you just need to say, ask, are you listening? So how do you recognize when someone's not listening to you and redirect the behavior?
Interestingly, it's counterintuitive. I find this in workspaces a lot. So, I mean, often how you know when someone's not listening to you is that they're interrupting, or like the next thing that they say like seems to completely disregard what you just said. And, or they're distracted, they're like looking at their cell phone, or they're like, like they're kind of like trying to like get you to like move on with it. So those are all nonverbal things that people are not listening. And then I would say, interestingly, I deal with this mostly with professionals who feel like their manager doesn't listen. And what I have found, and in relationships, in order, when you see that someone's not listening to you, what you actually have to do is show that you're listening to them. And if you start mirroring for them, and because they're keeping talking, often they're usually like talking a lot. They're talking because they want to impose their view, and they want to know that what they want to say is being heard. So often when you can like simply, concisely, like get to the point of what they're saying and reflect it, they're like, yeah, that's it. I get it. And then either the conversation is going to be over, or there's like an awkward silence. And what I have found is that once somebody can summarize that they're listening, and they do it in a quick way, and now you're like, oh, great, we scheduled like a 20-minute meeting, and I just got your point like across to you and showed that I understood it in 2 minutes. Now we have all this time. Somebody's going to say, do you have something that you'd like to share? So I always say that, like, when you feel that someone's not listening, listen to them, and it will likely and hopefully create the space for them to invite you to share your side. If they don't ask you, still start with listening, but then make the request. I know we got a chance to hear what you had to say, and I'm glad that you feel that I understand, know that I understand and I hear you, and that's really important to me. When you have time, I would also like to share with you my ideas. Do you think you could make some time for that? And if someone's going to feel like a jerk, if they know that you've heard them, they've been understood, they're not going to, I mean, I hope they're not going to say, no, like, I'm not going to make time to hear what you say. Then you have a different issue, but that's the place to start.
Right. I think that whole conversation, what you just said, it just changed the whole mood of everything. It's operating out of kindness, and mutual respect, and it changes the whole mood. And like you said, if they're going to be a jerk after that, then it's a whole another kind of problem. But
Right.
give people what you desire, and I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it for this week, guys. If you have any questions, where can we find you at?
Yeah, so you can find me www.mokshaliving.org, and that's M as in Mary, OKSHA, and then the word living.org, the same that's in the giveaway that I just gave. So you can find me there, as well as all of our services. And I would love to, like, if anybody wants to reach out to me directly, my email is on that website. If you want to learn about coaching, it's in the giveaway, and all that will connect you to being in contact with me.
All right, Michelle, stick around, but I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll be back in, I think, 2 weeks, but we'll also put information on the wall. Thanks for joining us on MECCA Moments for this Friday, August 28th. I hope you have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe. Bye-bye.